Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Amidst everything that's going on, it is still important to have conversations with our arts community. So I'm hoping you can join us today and talk about public art and podcast. Hi, Melanie. Hello. Miranda's joining us now. Hey, Nick.
You always see this chef in the kitchen.
As long as he's cooking, at least you got a man that's cooking in the kitchen. Well, thank you for joining us today. My brain is all over the place, as you maybe understand. And so I really just want to have a natural conversation because there was an article I want to reference, but before we go into the meat of the conversation, I really want to hear about you, your history, what you're doing right now, and where you're from. So tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you're doing.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I'll start with where I'm from. I am a mixed race Appalachian mutt from the foothills in North Carolina. My mom's side of the family is Cherokee, and she came off the mountain and found the whitest man she possibly could to procreate with, and that's how I'm here. And so grew up in North Carolina, very southern area of the universe, and started my educational pursuits. I thought I wanted to be a myth buster, so I actually started off in like chemistry and the sciences and had a very circuitous route to art.
Yeah.
My mother is extremely creative and used space as a way to problem solve and teach. And so art always felt integrated into the sciences. And then while I was in undergrad, I went to a metallurgy class and saw iron casting, and it was so ancient and primal and gorgeous. And I fell in love and switched over, became a sculptor, and started curating exhibitions because sculptors have a hard row, especially emerging sculptors, and started in the DIY scene and doing performances and sculpture. And, the whole time I'm working other jobs and waiting tables and doing vet clinic work and like all this other stuff. And I mention all that stuff because this job I have now working for the BeltLine feels very prestigious on the surface, where people are like, oh man, you must have done X, Y, and Z to get that job. And the thing is the sum of all my parts and all these lived experiences and all these other jobs, like, built it where I was a good candidate for curating in the public realm.
Yeah.
And so I always, every time I talk to students or I go and lecture about like how to get a job curating public art, I always tell people, like, you have to bring your authentic self and those experiences to that encounter. And that's how I ended up in an internship while I was in graduate school. And the dean of the sculpture department was like, you're really organized. How do you feel about like a formal curatorial internship? And I was like, that sounds terrible. And she was like, you should do it though. She's like, you need an internship. So I did an internship with the BeltLine back in 2014, and I fell in love with it. I had always had really mixed feelings about the BeltLine. I was gentrified out of my apartment in 2011 in Atlanta. So I saw this as an opportunity to affect change from the inside.
Right.
And I think
you've done that. I think you started that work.
We've started down the path, right? We started down the path. But that's really like the tale of how I got here to the BeltLine. And my curatorial pursuits are vast, and I do everything from public art that everyone sees that I do with the BeltLine to art and activism and art and sovereignty rights and stuff all over the country, and have done international work too. And I think that's important. You can be in love with your job and what you're doing, but make sure you're feeding those pieces of your soul that keep you whole.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. What I forgot to do, my brain is, when I tell you my brain is in la la land right now with everything just I want to introduce myself. My name is Lauren Jackson Harris. I'm the program coordinator for the AUC Art Collector, and I'm speaking today with Miranda Kyle. She is the Arts and Culture Program Manager for Art on the Belt for the Atlanta BeltLine Inc. distinction, right? And then she's also the curator for Art on the BeltLine. And her and I have known each other in these art streets for a couple of years and have gotten more acquainted. One thing that when she spoke about creating opportunities and kind of trying to, use public art as a way to rectify some issues, especially with the BeltLine in the city of Atlanta, which has gentrified neighborhoods and has caused some issues in Black neighborhoods especially. One thing that she did implement is an advisory council that comprises of individuals from all over the city of Atlanta from different backgrounds, and it is extremely diverse. And I think that was one of her major efforts that she's created to bring voices outside of the white canon to the public arts. So that's one thing I do want to applaud you on. And I am a member of that council. So thank you for bringing me on to share my voice as an Atlantan for what I want my constituents and my friends and my colleagues to see in terms of the BeltLine. So that has been an honor for me. And so when we speak about what's happening right now, one of the articles that I came up with was written by Amina Cooper. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's in the public arts program in Charlotte, North Carolina, I believe. And she wrote an article some months ago, right around the week that George Floyd murder happened. And she talked about the question that she's answering, how public art programs can join the movement against police brutality, white supremacy, and anti-Black racism. So, and I know you speak to a lot about that in terms of just Indigenous land being taken upon and colonized, and of course, Black bodies being colonized, Black space being colonized. Talk about your idea behind Atlanta being, a civil rights city, right? We are the birthplace of leaders and movements, and even still today, we're a largely Black city that doesn't get recognized as such. And being in the public art sector in Atlanta, how do you see the current public art setting? And how does it speak to the protests and the movements that have happened, and where do you see it going?
I love this question. Also, Amina is a badass. If y'all don't follow her on Instagram, you should. Yeah. She runs Black Art Monuments on Instagram, and I highly recommend it.
Yep.
So the big thing is like gatekeeping is huge in this city, and if you look at the people who are running public art programs, both for the city, for the county, and for NGOs, it's all white or white-coded folks for the most part.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's white women. And this is a power conversation. Like, folks don't like to get out of the way. They don't want to decenter themselves, and they don't want to give over power. So there was a brilliant conversation that came up over the summer over on Bosco's Instagram about this very thing, giving over power to Black folks, Indigenous folks, like folks of color, so that they have the autonomy to curate these spaces. And I think that is important, to hire folks to curate and cultivate these cultures and the culture in these spaces as a job, not just like on a one-off basis to like hit your DEI quota, right?
Yeah.
Like everybody over the summer was like, well, we got to hustle and like, we got to hire a Black person to say that like we're doing all the right things and like checking all of our boxes. And now here we are, in September, and Breonna Taylor's not getting any justice, and it's the anniversary of Emmett Till. Like all of these things are happening. It was lip service, and so it's really about getting out of the way and hiring people in positions. So if you're a person like me, white-coded human in a position of authority, it's about what are you doing to not gatekeep, to advocate for hiring folks in positions, and to get out of the way.
Right.
So when we see these community, activations that happen in the public spaces, very often city officials or government officials or organizational officials who have the authority over those spaces react really, they're very reactionary to community activations that happen, instead of being like, our shared public spaces are an ongoing commentary on our culture, and they cannot be constantly dictated to.
Yeah.
If not, you're just basically upholding the same, like, you know, white dude on a horse statue concepts, you know, and that's not, you know, a successful way for us as a community to think about our public shared domain. You know, that's something that is supposed to, you know, idealize the best of ourselves and what we aspire to be, you know, and public space is never meant to be an oppressive tool. And
Yeah.
if it is, you're doing it wrong. And
Right.
so a lot of it is like, you know, it's giving over power and in space, and it's holding people who won't do that accountable.
Yeah. You speak a lot in other places. I know we went to a conference some years ago about creative placemaking. And you make sure you're in conversations outside of Atlanta. You know, there's cities that are doing some really monumental things in terms of creating a community place in, you know, Black neighborhoods to make sure we have access to that type of experience, essentially, because we are a people that are neglected in that way. And when I think Detroit has some movements. South Central LA spoke about a movement. I think Toronto was speaking about how they're implementing some public art and creative placemaking. In your conversations and when you speak to audiences and lecture in other places, what is the response to what Atlanta is doing, or what do you see the differences that is happening outside of Atlanta?
Ooh. So I think this is the distinction between placekeeping and placemaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so placemaking came from like a very altruistic space in the 70s, right? And it was supposed to be like a few decades. Over the last few decades, it's become very perverted and almost like a colonization tactic, where people are like, we're going to go placemake in this neighborhood. And it's
Like, put a mural up and everybody will be fine.
Right. And, you know, artists have to realize if they ascribe to that sort of mentality, they're first wave gentrifiers.
Right.
And so they're like the foot soldiers of gentrification. So when we talk about placemaking now, it does have these like colonizer sort of overtones to it. What placekeeping speaks to in the inverse, and what we see with these successful efforts like in Detroit and LA, is where they are saying, who is already, we acknowledge that culture and art already exists in this space. How do we use the resources that would have been put into placemaking to elevate the culture and art that is already here, and once again give over that power, give over the authority, give over that curatorial, you know, executiveness to the community that is already doing the arts and culture and has been doing it forever, and help them navigate the bureaucratic processes to execute those public art programs. That is the biggest difference between like truly successful placekeeping and what we see sort of like lip service placemaking. And so when I go into these communities, and I'm up in Philadelphia and I'm talking to like the mural arts people, or, you know, I'm in New York or wherever, and we're having these conversations, that's where it always like rubs, right? Like people are like, how are we going to know that they're going to know what to do? And that is like inherently that like Eurocentric educational approach to like, we know best, like the communities that we're going into don't. And so that's one thing Atlanta does get praised for when I do go to these other spaces is, you know, I think other cities see that like Atlanta has a lot of incredible creative capital that gets invested into our, you know, our Black and person of color and immigrant communities. But as someone who lives here, I know that that's not necessarily true. Like, it's a really cool thing, like we project to the universe. But I think like Heather Infantry, like has been doing like the Lord's work over the last few
Literally.
months,
Yeah.
really like bringing it to the fore, talking about how like, no, we're not investing in these curators and these creative,
Right.
folks like we should be. And so I think there's a perception of Atlanta, and then there's like what actually is going on in Atlanta. And that's where we constantly have to have this conversation about placemaking versus placekeeping, especially
Yeah.
as we see an influx of developers and folks who best of intentions, but
It just seems like this an ever flowing balance of just like wanting opportunity, but also, is it safe? Is it meaningful? Is it worth it? To put up a mural, it can still feel unsafe for an artist to put up a mural in a space where they've been allowed to. We saw, what happened with Wonder Roots mural, that some of those didn't even get put up because some of the Black artists, the topics of what they wanted to place in certain spaces didn't get approved by the wall that was for the business that was there. And so it's just like there still is a disconnect with what art means and what art can be as a conduit to speak on people's feelings and emotions and experiences. One thing that I love about the BeltLine, that as it's developing, I think with you being there for the last 3 years, there has been more consideration, especially with bringing in the council. What are some of the projects? This is maybe a more fun question. What are some of the projects that you've seen that we've had to turn down that were just like, no? Because I know there's one that always sticks in my mind that I'm like, why is this even proposed? But like, what is a project that we didn't accept that you was like, this can't work in Atlanta? Like, this is a no.
Well, the BeltLine is such a weird animal because we're like a transit corridor, so we kind of follow like highway rules. So inevitably every year there's like a super rad like playable sculpture that we can't do because we can't do like playground equipment.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ones that we got that we were like, this is awesome, but we're never going to be able to do it. Was they made like turned a trampoline into like a giant tambourine, so it had like bells and all kinds of stuff on it, so it was like an immersive playable instrument, and we were like, who, our legal team would have a heart attack. Cannot do that. But I think about I think it's more advocating for community actions that happen on the BeltLine, and being able to say, no, those need to stay because those are an important part of our conversations. Like the Black Lives Matter mural that was put on the corridor on Juneteenth this summer. Like really going to bat to saying, why this is important. And we didn't commission it. And we probably wouldn't have ever commissioned a piece like that, but why it's important for it to stay.
Yeah.
The memorial photo wall that is, on the West Side Trail down at Aline Avenue, another community action. We didn't commission it, but it's important for it to stay.
Yeah.
The historic graffiti that is all over this corridor.
Yeah.
And those writers who have maintained and preserved these walls, graffiti is such an important art, historical, and public art action in this city, especially with spaces like the So Deaf Wall.
Yeah.
That are just iconic from what the history they tell of Atlanta, but also like the reclamation of space. Like 75-85 destroyed Black and poor neighborhoods in South Atlanta. And the action by these writers to reclaim and reunite these spaces is vital to the history when we talk about public art as action and activism. And that's why, we're working to preserve those spaces and saying, yes, it's graffiti, but it is so historically significant to this city. It has to stay. And making sure that our writers who keep our corridor interesting and are in the tunnels and on, the sidewalks and streets, that they're protected and not harassed, and able to still paint on the corridor, those things that allow old Atlanta to coexist with new Atlanta, I think is vital.
Yeah. One question that Amina poses in her article with the wave of protests is, how can public art respond to the Black Lives Matter movement? Should it? what will we do about the public artwork that is being tagged and damaged during these protests? So you think about what is, I think it's in Philadelphia or DC, the one that is literally covered in graffiti and flowers. Where is that one?
Virginia.
Virginia. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, them leaving it that way and not tearing it down or not trying to clean it off, leaving it as it is. And there's some that are being taken down, and there's some that are staying, and nobody, you know, is even questioning it. Think what level, you know, when do you say it stays? Is it formed like it becomes, the art evolved into the times because it literally was tagged? Or do we take them down in response to it? Or do we leave them? Of course we don't leave them. Because what was the statistic that you shared? That just made me think about the statistic that you shared of how many men on horses.
It's something like 1,700 or 1,000. It's ridiculous. And the ones of women is like 700. You know, it's like a geometric difference.
The difference. Yeah. Yeah. So like how does that, so think about those questions in terms of like, especially now with what's happening in Kentucky, like when things are what people say with defaced or damaged, to me, it's an evolution of such. You know, how do you see that in terms of what Atlanta, I don't think Atlanta has had too much defacement of public art, but I know some things have been damaged in the process, and there have been some issues with public art. You know, how can public art respond to what's going on right now?
I think, for one, we can learn a lot from graffiti, and this idea that I don't care if it's made out of bronze or marble, there should be no such thing as permanent public art. We need to approach this as public art encapsulates an instant in time, but that means that it needs to constantly evolve, and we need to be open to that change. Like, I think that when we see pieces like the Robert E. Lee statue in Virginia covered in graffiti and chipped at, and there's black ballet dancers dancing on the base, like, that needs to be praised as the new evolution of this piece. You know, when things are removed, right? Like when we remove a statue or sculpture because we've designated it problematic, the void that space leaves cries out for provenance. It wants to know, like, why that doesn't mean we necessarily have to throw another statue there, but it does mean that that bare pad or that rubble is important and has now become part of the history of this space. You know, one of my passion projects that I'm just trying to get off the ground, you know, is to talk with people who want to see a different Stone Mountain Park, who don't want to see, you know, these old racist white dudes up on the sacred hill of the Muskogee people, you know, and what does that look like? You know, that's the things, like, I think that collectively we dream about dancing on the rubble of an old world that was memorialized in that way. And the fact that that rubble, that remnant, the defacement, the vandalism is just as important to this story of that space as if we can't just remove it and pretend like it wasn't there. You know, so like I dream of this time when I could go to Stone Mountain Park and those figures are blasted off the face, and that the rubble at the base of the hill is now that new memorial, right? And that's what we gather around. We gather around the rubble and celebrate it. And I think that that's how we have to approach these, you know, is that the actions taken against that public art is important. And as classically trained art people, you know, anytime a work of art is destroyed or damaged, and that's our perception, the gut response is like, oh no, how could they? We have to fix it. But public art is a conversation. It's not a one-way dialogue. And I think that that's something we have to embrace.
One of the pieces that I think got a hard no in looking at the proposals, it was, I still laugh about it to this day, and it didn't get approved from our jury looking at it, but it was like a giant popsicle, right? And I was like, this can't go on the South Side. Like, there's kids that can't buy popsicles there. So, like, we literally have to consider the placement of the artwork when, you know, we're looking at this stuff. So when you think about placement, talk about some of the work that you've done in placing art, and not even just Atlanta, but in other spaces. I know you jury some other sculpture and public art efforts from other organizations. Talk about how do you consider and curate the art or select art in terms of when you jury or select art for a BeltLine or a project?
I'm going to like tie that into like one of the questions I think Scrappy Unicorn asked in the comments, like, can we get rid of Mount Rushmore too? Fun fact, the same racist asshole that carved Mount Rushmore did Stone Mountain. So like yes, he's a Klan member. He was really into racist white guys, and he liked sticking them all over sacred indigenous mountains all over the country. So that is an important point, because location and space, that the sort of like the context bow of public art, is so incredibly important to when we cite artwork, right?
Yeah.
And because the way that the BeltLine moves is like, we're moving through neighborhoods that have been disinvested, that maybe don't even know that the BeltLine is coming to like their space. So when we're citing artwork, that is always a sensitivity. If we have an artist creating work that is, say, they're from Adair Park, or they're from West Side or West End, and they're like, hey, I really want my artwork to be seen in my neighborhood, that's an important consideration we make.
Right.
The inverse of that is this, an artist from, the West End may say, you know what, I think it's important because of the message from my artwork that I put it in the Old Fourth Ward, so that those folks over there see my message. And so we work very closely with the artist and consider the intent of their work and their messaging when we talk about citing. That doesn't mean it's a perfect art form, truly, and there have definitely been missteps, and, just straight up fuck ups, and that happens, but I think making it as collaborative of a process as possible, like, equates the success of the citing of the piece.
Right. So I know right now with the BeltLine, we have about 4 more minutes. With the BeltLine, there's we have the lantern parade that is going on right now. The virtual version, since COVID, we can't be, last year we were passing out shirts and pamphlets and all kinds of stuff literally on the BeltLine. Talk about, I guess, the transition for the BeltLine now that we are in this COVID era, and maybe some projects that you're working on with the BeltLine.
I think for me, the biggest thing is making sure we're advocating for our performance artists, because I feel like they've really suffered the most when it comes to this virtual space. Murals and sculptures we can still safely put out on the corridor because they don't necessarily require an audience, but the performance artists, our dancers and musicians, they've lost gigs. So what we're trying to do is figure out this whole virtual platform world, especially now where everyone is suffering like extreme Zoom fatigue and everybody's just kind of over it and staring at their computer screens. And so once again, that's another like collaborative effort with our performance artists and our musicians is, how do we, support them and make the experience as interesting as possible for a virtual audience. And so we're exploring things from like Instagram Live, YouTube, Twitch, for all the youths doing cool stuff on Twitch.
What is Twitch? I don't know what Twitch is.
It's a video game platform, but it's amazing for streaming content. And so, really embracing technologies on how to support our performance artists, I think, has been the biggest pivot for us. And so we'll be launching that next month, and we'll see what that looks like.
Well, I'm excited to see what that transitions to. I think you've done a wonderful job in pivoting. And we have 2 questions, it looks like, really quick. Jasmine says, for undergrads interested in public art curating, what can they do to professionalize?
That is a great question. Public art curation is a whole separate skill set from gallery or institutional curation. And so I would highly, highly recommend trying to get an internship, an apprenticeship, or something with a public art organization, be that governmental or NGO to get some practice and see how it's done. Because, you know, my background in like fabrication and heavy machine operation helped with my current job.
Yeah, I think her next question was, how do you offer internships and for the art program, and how can our students be a part of it?
We used to. I'm trying really hard to resurrect that project. We do some volunteer stuff right now. The closest thing to an apprenticeship we have is the Curator in Residence program.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's a scholar in residence too that maybe if somebody's interested in working in that sector could apply for as well.
Absolutely.
And what is the application? When is the application process for that? I know I think we've already gone through this year's, right?
Right. It'll open again in January.
Boom. Next. So yeah. So if anybody's interested in working with the BeltLine, look out for the scholar in residence or curator residence position that will open up in January. Oh, I hate that we have to stop now, but I feel like I have so many more questions. But yes, Miranda, thank you so much. Thank you to On the BeltLine for allowing me to be part of this conversation. And I hope to everybody follow Miranda because she does post a lot about public art around the world and her response to that. So definitely follow her if you are interested in having her speak. She is quintessential person to speak to in terms of public art and creative placemaking or placemaking and making. Keeping. That's what it was. Keeping. Yes. Placekeeping. Thank you so much, Miranda. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
This has been an honor. Thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate it.
Of course. Bye. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye. All right, you guys stay with us. We are going to be bringing in Jamaal Barber next. He is an artist, educator, and founder or creator of the StudioNoize podcast. So stay with me. Stay with me. Jamaal, are you there? Go ahead and request to join if you can. And we're going to get started with Jamaal. That was a really good conversation. I love Miranda. She's amazing. I hope that you guys learned something about public art. And if you're not in the city of Atlanta, definitely look into the public art programs within your own city. There he is. And see what you can do to be a part of that effort. There's Jamaal. Oh, is it coming? What's up, homie?
What's up? What's up? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, yes. I was listening to that conversation too. Like,
oh, you were?
Yeah, like, who's this Jamaal dude? Why is he coming in and messing up the conversation?
You're not messing up anything. It's just we're just going to pivot and keep it moving, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so everybody welcome Jamaal Barber. He is a printmaker extraordinaire. Now he's going into painting, and that's what you see behind him right now. He is also an educator, speaker about his work, and he is the founder of StudioNoize podcast, which hosts creators, makers, and arts workers from all over, actually. So yeah, welcome Jamaal Barber.
Hey. What's up? Yeah.
So let's just get started. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? What brought you to Atlanta? Even though I know already. What brought you to Atlanta and what was your trajectory into the art scene?
So I came to Atlanta chasing my wife. So like we were in school together at East Carolina and North Carolina, and she graduated before me, came down. She ended up going to Georgia Tech and Georgia State and getting her master's and her PhD in chemistry. And so that's where she was. So I was like, yo, that's where I'm gonna be at too. So I came down like chasing her, and I don't know, I think my introduction to the art scene was like, I knew I would do art, but I ended up getting my degree in graphic design. So when I got here, it was around the time that the Black Arts Festival was happening. This was when Richard Mayhew was the featured speaker. So I was there. I was there around that time. So around that time, Atlanta was different than it is right now. You know what I'm saying? It had like a whole different vibe. So I kind of got into that scene and, slowly just started doing art shows, started making work, hopefully trying to get my foot in the door, trying to get people to listen to me and, work from there.
You've done that.
I hope so. I hope somebody listens.
What was, I guess, the Atlanta art scene? Talk about it then. What year was this and what was it like at that moment? for you?
This was I think the first time I visited Atlanta was '02. I think I
Okay.
moved down in like late '03,
Okay.
'04.
That's when I left.
So yeah. Yeah, so that's it feel like a long time ago.
Yeah.
Like, a whole lifetime ago before since I've
It
been here.
does. Yeah.
But the Atlanta art scene then, I mean, it was I don't know, I felt like it was more major events happening, like if that makes
Mm,
sense.
yeah.
Because the Black Arts Festival was still strong. Um, it was a lot of artists out exhibiting work and trying to make stuff happen. So a lot of like the groundwork for what you see now was
Yeah.
happening then. And that's when, all of us was coming up at the same time. So I think I was
Yeah.
doing little shows with Fabian, you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying? I think W had just started Art Beats and Lyrics around that time.
Oh,
So
okay.
it was like that whole team were there. And plus you still had the old heads were still around. Like, we would go to these drawing sessions at Studio Clout. They used to
Yeah.
have like drawing sessions where you could come and they had live models and you would just be up there drawing and like Kevin Williams would be there beside you and like Morris Evans would come up. It's like,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
like, yo, this is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
but that was the vibe and we was all just out trying to get it. So it was real supportive. I think that's what I needed at the time. It's like somebody to support me in a different way because it's not the type of scene in North Carolina. Like
Mm.
it's way more
A little
scrappy.
different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it felt like you just had access to more people, more information here.
And here in Atlanta. Good.
Yeah,
Well, that's a good thing. And I think it's still I think it's evolved a little bit, but I think it's still a little bit of the same. I think the Black arts community in particular is becoming a little more close knit because we're literally, our degrees of separation is 0.5, right? It's like everybody kind of knows
yeah, that's true.
everybody. It is.
Yeah, everybody
It's very
everybody
close.
knows everybody. Yeah,
Right.
and
Right.
I
Or
mean
some kind
that.
of way of or know through or around somebody. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not that many spaces for you to show artwork. So
Right.
whenever you go, like you have a space in mind, like you go there and see somebody doing a show, like that's where you go. Like you go hang out, you meet your folks, like, yo, you doing this? Like I'm doing this. Like y'all
Yeah.
collaborating, doing shows together. Like we in like group shows. Dan Flores was doing Artist King at the time.
Yeah.
And so like, a whole bunch of people was involved in that. So it's like it was just a network of people together out trying to do it. So
Yeah.
I appreciated that kind of stuff.
So when you think about a network, because I think you are a talker, you like connecting, you like making friends and getting to know people, and really you ask questions a lot. Like
Making
you
friends, yeah.
making friends, like you get into people's psyche, their ideas, you like to know more. And I think one thing, when you started StudioNoize podcast, it made sense to me. You like asking
Right.
questions and digging deeper.
Yeah.
One of the feelings that I had starting today was just like, there's so much going on around us right now in terms of just racial unrest and just, yeah, just a lot of emotional stuff going on. So in
Yeah.
terms of
All of that.
your artwork, all of that, right? In terms of your artwork and production, how has that affected it? And because I want to go into the podcast in terms of like a positive. So in terms of your artwork, has the times in the last 6 months affected your production or the work that you're creating?
I think because I've always been like on the kind of social justice tip. So if you look at any of my
Yes.
work, like
I'm
for
going to show you. Let
a
me pull
long
one up.
time, yeah, it's that like all my work is
Oh, I
always
wish I
about.
could see it. Oh,
Oh, you can't see the full screen. Yeah, but
you
all my
can't see the full.
artwork is always about some level of projecting. And I call it black propaganda because I was out trying to convince or show people the pride and humanity of black folks and
Yeah.
like unapologetically. And so like all of my work was real confrontational about my feelings about how black people are treated, how we should be treated, how we are as a people, in spite of the stereotypes and stuff that get afflicted on us, like, and
Yeah.
just to give people room to be themselves. And
Yeah.
so, coming around this pandemic, I was really strong. Like last year, I did the 400 show, which is a big collaborative show that had like a lot of artists involved and just telling the story from 1619 to
Mm-hmm.
2019. It was a big collaborative project, and involved in that just to get all facets of what people think about blackness, because I think blackness is a concept that I'm constantly thinking about. It's kind of this connectivity that we all share, kind of this one thing, even though we're so different, we're all like so the same. Like our stories relate to one another. Our stories are all based on the same history, like the same circumstances. Like no matter where you are, like a black person is getting treated bad in Nebraska, getting treated bad in Georgia the same way. Like it's no
Yeah.
difference. Like, so, you know, like, so I love that to have that conversation. But I think going into COVID and like getting into lockdown and like taking a beat and a pause, like especially when George Floyd stuff happened, it's like I was just so disengaged from it. You know what I'm saying? Like I had been doing a lot of reading, and I don't want that to be my whole life. You know what I'm saying? Like it can't just live in the struggle forever. So I really want to talk about what's beyond that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like what can give you peace beyond just this constant struggle? Like still engage in the struggle, but I think of people like John Lewis, right? And then part of this is why I could come off my tongue so good, is because this is what my thesis is about. It's about this idea of, like, you look at a life like John Lewis. He was 19, 20 when he got hit over the head at the Edmonds Pettus Bridge. He died in his 80s still fighting. So it's like this is an entire lifetime this man spent engaged in the struggle, and it still never ended. So the struggle is not going to give you peace. The struggle will give you your rights and give you like a legal recourse. But in terms of how you see yourself and how you feel, the struggle is not going to give you peace. So where do you get your peace from? And that's where my art kind of changed and morphed, where it's like I'm not so much projecting anymore. I'm trying to almost turn inward to try to understand, like, despite these circumstances, like how was Martin Luther King still able to play pool and hang out and drink with Jesse Jackson? You know, and while at the same time his life was on the line, still engaged in the fight. But he did more beyond that. Like I read this book by Christina Cleveland. I interviewed her on a podcast about Christ Our Black Mother. And in it was very interesting how she talked about how seeing yourself in divinity changes how you feel about the universe, right? When you envision God not as a white man lording over you, it creates an automatic disconnect because of the history and what has happened in America that you know and feel and understand, like a divide. And so what happens when you envision God as yourself, as a black woman who is nurturing, who is encouraging, who's loving, and loves you unconditionally, do you feel like the universe is on your side? It's an amazing book. So I think that's not so much the religion part of it, but just the idea that there's more that you can engage and feel, and how do you express that as a black person? So I think that's where my work has really gone to now. So that's why the painting came in, because I needed something different to express that idea, because the prints have a function. The prints are great. And they have a function. I'm never going to stop doing prints, but I don't know. It just felt like it's time for a sharp turn, because you learn these processes and that becomes your process. And you can stay locked in that same box if you don't change it up every once in a while. So, you know, trying to do some painting. I don't know. It may be working, maybe not, you know.
Right. I guess talk a little bit about your education. Like, I know you're in school right now. You talked about your thesis and what it's on. What is your thesis on, and what is your focus right now in terms of your education? You're getting your master's, correct?
Yeah, I get my master's in printmaking at Georgia State. Yeah. So I'm getting my master's in printmaking at Georgia State. And my thesis is going to just be focused on that idea. A tentative title for it is called Fullness. And so just the idea of what makes you whole, and beyond the struggle, beyond somebody defining what you are and who you are, like what do you reach to for you to have a spiritual core and a peace, a peace beyond understanding, right? That's what it's supposed to be. And so that's what my thesis is about.
Okay, cool. That's dope. I mean, I think that speaks to your work, and especially, so I think that it works. I'm looking forward to reading it. Hopefully, you can make it public so I can read it. For sure. So switching over to StudioNoize, what is why did you feel like a podcast was good? I think it's been about y'all celebrated a year.
2 years.
I think recent. 2 years. Yeah, 2 years. Because I was on one of the first ones like 2 years ago in 2018.
Yeah, way back.
I was episode 3.
Yeah.
I think. I think Shanika was first. Yeah, I was really early. But essentially, you started these conversations when you first came to me. You were like, I want to start having conversations with, you know, arts workers, artists, creatives in the world. One thing I love is that your interview with Dr. Driscoll, like,
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that you have a range of levels of people that are from emerging artists to professionally working artists to Dr. Driscoll to me, like little old me, like you had like your range of who you're talking to and how you pull information out of him. Like even Kevin Sipp, to me, I call him the Atlanta art historian because he literally has a book of information in terms of what the Atlanta art scene has been doing over the last, 20 years. Talk about the reason why you created it and go into kind of the purpose behind it.
So it started off where I was having IG conversations just like this about grad school. Because I just wasn't sure about it. Like, you know, I just like, do I even need to go to grad school? What is it going to be like? Are they going to tell me my work is too black? Like, you know, all this kind of stuff I'm concerned about. So I started having a couple conversations. And one of the conversations, because of the glitch in IG, I couldn't save it. And I was like, yo, that's kind of lame. Like, have all this great information. It's like, you can't save it. Like, the technology is way more developed now than it was, like, right when they introduced it. Like back then. So it's like you don't even have like the options and stuff like you usually have or need. So I decided I needed to record it. So I wanted to do a podcast to do it and have those conversations. So it eventually it was a thing that I was doing just for like see what happened. And then like somewhere along the line I got serious about it. And you know, I started reaching out. Like the first person I think, because I just started interviewing people I knew about just life experience, because I think this is a part of Atlanta and like the life of an artist that people need to hear about, because a lot of people ask you questions like, how do you get in a gallery? You know what I'm saying? Where do you find your motivations? Like all these questions people always ask. And like I ask the same questions because different people will come up with all these creative processes. And, and so I wanted to record it and get it down and lock it down in history. So I think the first person I reached out to, other than who I knew, because the first like couple episodes is like, it's you, it's Shaniqua, it's like close friends, like people that I know and like hang out with all the time. But then I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try something different. So I reached out to Latoya Hobbs. I think she was like the first out of town person that we had on the podcast. So it's like, all right. Then it's like, all right, let's see who else I can reach out to. And so when I reached out to, it was I think it was Delita, but I reached out to Deborah Martin.
Delita Martin.
Yeah, but I reached out to Deborah Roberts first. And she agreed to come on the episode. And I was like,
that
really?
was big.
Yeah,
I was like,
really?
Deborah Roberts?
Yeah, like Deborah Roberts, like you gonna talk to me? Like, really?
Yeah.
Like he was excited. Like, and then you know, started getting people that would message me and say how much they liked the show. And it's like, wow, all the people are really listening. So you know, might as well keep doing it. And it was kind of like, it's just become part of my process now to talk and get all these like inspirational tips and learn what other people is doing and like introduce people and how these conversations it's just part of what I do now.
Yeah, and I think it's important to archive. I mean, to me, it's creating your own archive of what Black individuals, creators, and workers are doing in this space. Because even with like, you know, Jamia Richmond Edwards and how she's growing and now she's represented by Garland, New York, watching her grow, you know, Steve Prince, your fellow printmaker, talking with Dr. Driscoll, Jeremiah Ojo, people who are catapulting the Black art scene. It's creating an archive of conversation. I think it's going to be important, especially from now. I think these conversations can last a lifetime because of the type of questions that you ask and the way you pull out their process, their why, their reason, and even their experiences in the art world. I think I listened to Dr. Driscoll's at least 3 or 4 times, just because, especially, I mean, in this, maybe twice before he passed, but after he passed, I listened to it twice, just because it hit differently again, because you never know when somebody's knowledge is going to leave this earth.
That's true.
And the way you're collecting their information, their processes, and their knowledge is very important to me in terms of what the purpose of a podcast should be. It should be fun, enlightened, and airy, but it also should be an archival process. We should be capturing these stories, and that's essentially what you're doing. You're capturing stories, and it could be, and it's also a conduit for your own work and how you create, I'm sure.
And I'm gonna say this, it's also about when I do a lot of studio visits, like I go visit a lot of people and I'm connecting and having, and the conversation we have on the podcast is exactly what we talk about when I'm in Charlie's studio.
Yeah.
having this kind. That's what we talk about. It's not just art. It's like all kinds of stuff. It's just a variety, range of like whatever's happening, what you're working on, who do you think is like doing it good, like all those conversations. Like, so a lot of it is I want to capture that experience for other people that can't have it, because I know I needed it. Like coming into from being from North Carolina, there were no professional artists in North Carolina. There were no other people working it. So if you want to be an artist in North Carolina, you have nowhere to go. So this is sort of where you can kind of get a little bit of that experience of being in the studio, having somebody be open. And I think that me being an artist and the way I approach the questions is it's not an academic thing. Like it's very much a grassroots. I'm in your studio talking to you, trying to relate and figure out how do we get better, both of us. You know what I'm saying?
And I think I think it humanizes us too, because I think when people think about even artists, you know, it hearing the stories behind the imagery that you all create, right? Hearing, you know, maybe you might ask about somebody's childhood or somebody's mom, or, you know, what school they went to. All that gives context to their work. So where do you see, you know, you got picked up by National Black Arts Festival as a program. Congratulations for that. So has that allowed you to expand the podcast even further? Have you gained an audience from that? Because I know in terms of what our world is doing now with people being at home, a lot of people are listening to podcasts, reading digital books, and doing Zooms. A podcast is probably one of the best things you could be doing right now, especially because everyone is sitting. Have you seen a transition for the podcast because of that?
Not especially. I gotta say that Black Art in America was helping us before NBAF. So like a big shout out to Black Art in America too.
Yes, Black Art in America.
And I think along the way, it's like when I needed support, they were there. And when I didn't know I needed support, they were there. If that makes sense. Like, you know, because when you're doing this thing, like you're kind of doing a thing, and you don't really know how far it can go or how far you're going to reach or what's available. So, but talking with both groups, it's like it makes you feel like somebody is out there, and it validates your work a little bit. Make you feel like you're not just by yourself in these basements, like calling people. Like, you know, like somebody's actually like paying attention and appreciating the work of it. So what was the other question?
I guess, have you seen a growth in your your audience because of COVID? You
know what? I don't pay attention to the numbers that much. I know that's a hard thing for people. I swear to God, like I just now redid the website and put in the links to be able to track it, and that's this year. So it's like, before that, it's like it's just a thing that I'm doing. Like I don't, you know, I'm just Jamaal. I'm just here in Atlanta making prints. Like who really knows who I am? You know, look for me or even want to talk. You know, or listen to what I gotta say. So a lot of it is like to not leave room to discourage myself when you look at it and it's like, oh, you only got 10 people listening this week. Like you might as well stop. Like, no, I'm not gonna stop. You know what I'm saying? That type of thing. So I'm self-motivated in that way. And artists have to be like that. Like you don't have an audience till you have an audience, but you got to do like so much work just to get to the point where you're worthy of people listening to you in the first place. Right. And so that's how I approached the podcast. So it wasn't until recently where I even thought about keeping track of stuff, because it's like the work is important, whether people are listening to it at this moment right now or not. You know what I'm saying? And that's kind of how I've been approaching it. So I have partly because of the formula of how we did the podcast changed too. You know, where I sought out more engagement from people by having like a question of the week. Having listeners give me like voicemails for our 100 episode, like all this kind of stuff. Like, so I'm changing too, and I'm starting to engage with it a little bit more. And so the podcast is just growing like its own little thing in how we approach it and how people are responding to it. So I hope people are listening. I know people are listening because, you know.
No, people are listening,
people are listening.
When I realized, I think in this time, you could, like, even with these IG lives or Zooms or podcasts, sometimes people, like, I go back to your podcast. I'm like, you know, I'm working with Jamaal on something, so I'm going back and listening to her podcast to understand her more, like, or I'm going back to listen to David Driscoll because I just need a word from an elder, like, you know, like they're always going to live there. It lives in this digital space. I think Floyd spoke to basically creating the digital archive, like you're creating the digital archive. So the conversations are important. If you guys, I definitely want all of you here, you know, right now we have 11 people, but in 2 weeks, it'll be, you know, 300 views. So I want everyone that watches this to understand, go to the podcast. I mean, I think you're on your almost 100th episode.
Yeah, we had one. Our last episode was 100.
It was 100. Yeah. Yep. Did you celebrate that?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Just 100 episodes, 2 years, 100 episodes, Joe. We did it.
Did I miss that? Maybe I missed that. But congratulations on 100
we did
episodes plus episodes. And Dr. Finley of the ACR Collective was one of the people that he interviewed. So that'll be on next season's, hopefully.
Yeah. We got to do that because you know what? The funny thing about that interview, and we might have to get her back on because it was pre-COVID. And when that conversation hit, the
conversation might change a little bit.
Yeah, it don't sound the same. It don't, like, this is not speaking to the moment. So it feels slightly dated. So we might have to redo that one and get like the new perspective.
Oh, I'm sure she would definitely love to do it again. We can make that happen.
Yeah.
We can definitely make that happen to get her on again. In terms of what the ACR Collective is doing and getting, I guess, working with the Atlanta arts community, what ways do you feel that, you know, with the podcast, with the Atlanta arts community, with the ACR Collective, what do you feel like Atlanta is doing right now? And how do you feel like we could continue to enrich it?
I know, you know, it's a weird time because, like, everybody, it's not just dealing with art, like we're dealing with the pandemic. So it's like, it's not even like, we're not even at a space where we can just focus on how do we grow, how do we get better, what can Atlanta do? It's more or less like, what can we do now in this time, in this,
for sure,
with this environment and the restrictions we have, like the way that Mint is doing shows with the dots in the floor, you know what I mean, where you gotta like walk around. It's like, so it's like, I don't know if we're at the point yet where we can get back to focus on the scene itself. Like, I think we just have to, we're more or less focusing on surviving, you know, and that's not a bad thing. You know what I'm saying? No. That's not a bad thing, especially like, that's what these groups need to do. I love how these groups are giving artists grants, you know what I'm saying? To let people survive right now. I love how we are turning our attention, and Miranda spoke to this too, about like the performing artists and theaters and like the actors, like, are really struggling because they can't get together. They can't have their venues
perform in front of people.
And the Zoom is not the same. You know what I'm saying? Like, so like, how do you get value out of that experience in the same way? So I think a lot of that is, until we get past this, until people wear their damn mask, right? And let us get back to where we need to go. Like, you know, we can't even start to think about that yet. That's separately from, that's organizations. That's not artists. Artists have a different threshold to cross at this point. Like, at this point, you have to keep creating and speak to the moment that's happening. Right? Like, because I mean, you're still a creative being. You still are necessary. You still need your voice. You need to make that noise. Like I say on the podcast, you need to make that noise. So the artist's responsibility is different from the group responsibility. Yeah. And so if the artists are still out there making that work, the work is going to find a place for itself. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
For sure. I mean, she talked about public art in response to that. And so it's, you know, it's like, hopefully, you know, I was talking to Ash Nash the other day about the mental health of Black artists in the city and how we're feeling and what we're doing in response to that. How are we caring for ourselves as individuals? Because this is a different time. This is a pandemic, and we're also possibly emotionally affected by what we're seeing, right? And so it's just, artists can be a conduit for seeing a brighter image, a hopeful image, but we also can capture the true raw emotions of what we're dealing with. But in terms of your conversations, I think you're doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic got me painting. So you know, like I'm the printmaker supreme. That's all I do. You know, that got me out here painting. So
it inspired you to switch it up. It inspired you, right?
Yeah, because it's definitely a struggle where, you know, like I said, the way I took it is like the George Floyd thing. It's like, okay, damn, 45 seconds. Y'all subscribe to StudioNoize.
Well, one person wants to know what's the title of the book that you said you read.
Christ Our Black Mother Speaks by Dr. Christina Cleveland. Boom.
Hope that answers your question. 28 seconds. Please go follow StudioNoize Podcast and follow J Barber Studio. Yep. Buy his art. it speaks to us all in terms of the community, outside Black community as well, but it is Black.
Super Black.
Him and make sure you go to his podcast and listen to all of the wonderful conversations. Jamaal,
Yes,
Barber, thank you for joining
100 episodes.
us today.
For sure. Anytime.